It was just another busy afternoon at the small diner on Main Street, the kind of place where everyone knew your name, or at least your order. Emily, a 32-year-old single mom, bustled behind the counter, her dark brown hair tied back in a neat ponytail, her uniform a little worn but still presentable. She had seen it all: grumpy customers, long shifts, and the constant balancing act of caring for her 8-year-old son, Jake, while working tirelessly to make ends meet. But today, something felt different. As she approached a table where a group of 4 middle-aged men sat, she felt the tension rise. They were regulars, office workers from the nearby corporate building, well-dressed in crisp suits and polished shoes. But today their conversation was louder, more pointed. They seemed to be laughing a bit too hard, their eyes lingering just a little too long on her. "Hey, sweetheart," one of the men, Robert, called out with a smirk. "You look like you've seen better days. You sure you're not overworked?" His tone dripped with condescension. The others snickered, exchanging glances that made Emily's skin crawl. She smiled thinly, trying to keep her composure. "Is there anything I can get you today, gentlemen?" she asked, her voice steady despite the nerves tightening in her chest. But Robert wasn't done. "Yeah," he said, eyes scanning her uniform. "Maybe you should take a break. You look like you're about to drop dead on the spot." The men laughed, and Emily felt a flush of embarrassment rise to her cheeks. But she didn't let it show. She kept her eyes down, jotting down their orders. "Anything else I can get you?" she asked again, her voice tight. It wasn't just an offhand comment. It was bullying, plain and simple. And Emily, as strong as she was, could feel her resolve beginning to crack. What made it worse was the other customers, who seemed to ignore the entire exchange, pretending not to hear. It felt like a small, isolated corner of the world where she was the target. But little did she know, this would be the day everything changed, the day someone would stand up for her. But before we dive deeper into Emily's story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on the rest of this gripping tale. You won't believe what happens next. As Emily hurried back into the kitchen, her mind was racing. The moment with Robert and his friends had stung, but something about the way Keanu had entered the diner, the way he carried himself, kept her distracted. She needed a moment to gather herself, to take a breath. The kitchen was empty except for a couple of cooks preparing the next round of orders. Emily leaned against the counter, closing her eyes for a brief second, letting the sounds of clattering dishes and sizzling pans wash over her. But the thoughts wouldn't stop. Why does it always have to be this way? She'd been working at Dottie's diner for the past 3 years, and this kind of treatment wasn't new. She'd heard every joke, every sarcastic comment, every joke about not fitting in. But it still hurt, every single time. The truth was, Emily had always been the one to take care of others. Even growing up, she'd taken on the responsibility of helping her single mother raise her 2 younger siblings. Her mum worked long hours as a nurse, and Emily stepped in as a sort of surrogate parent when she wasn't around. She learned to be strong at a young age, even when things seemed impossible. She had to be, for her family, for her mom. But then came the worst day of her life, the day her own marriage crumbled. Emily had married her high school sweetheart Tom when she found out she was pregnant. Their son Jake was the joy of her life, but things between her and Tom had never been easy. He had struggled with addiction, with finding a job, and eventually he left, just as she had been counting on him. It was like the rug had been pulled from beneath her. For months, Emily had felt like she was drowning. She had no support system, no close friends to lean on, and no family to pick up the slack. It was just her and Jake, her little boy who needed her to be strong. So she picked up the pieces, moved forward, and never looked back. Her mother, now retired, had moved to Florida, and though Emily stayed in touch with her, there was only so much advice and love over the phone could provide. As for Tom, he was gone, and that was a wound Emily didn't know how to heal. Raising Jake alone wasn't easy, but Emily had learned that she could handle whatever life threw her way. Working at Dottie's diner had been a blessing, giving her the flexibility to pick up extra shifts while making sure Jake was cared for. But the bullying she had faced from customers, men like Robert and his friends, was constant. Some days, it felt like the world was telling her she didn't matter, that she wasn't enough. She glanced up at the clock. Her shift wasn't over yet. She couldn't afford to stay in the back and wallow in her own thoughts. Jake would be waiting for her at home, and she had to pick up his schoolwork. She had to make sure he had a good life, even if it meant dealing with assholes like Robert. Taking a deep breath, Emily straightened her shoulders. "You can do this," she told herself. But then she heard the unmistakable sound of laughter. The men at the table, Robert and his group, were still at it, their voices carrying to the back of the diner. Emily felt a pang of frustration, but she forced herself to stay calm. There were always people like them. Always. Just get through the next hour, she thought. But then, out of nowhere, she saw him again. Keanu. She had almost forgotten about him. But there he was, seated in the same corner of the diner, calmly sipping his coffee as though the world outside didn't exist. He'd clearly noticed the scene earlier, but now he seemed lost in his own thoughts, his eyes focused on something far away. Emily couldn't help but feel a strange sense of comfort in knowing that someone had witnessed what had happened. Maybe he'll say something, she thought. Maybe he'll do something, but she couldn't dwell on it. She had work to do. Just then the bell above the door jingled, and a couple of new customers walked in. Emily gave one last glance in Keanu's direction before getting back to her task. As she passed by the men's table again, Robert shot her. A smile, the kind that was too smug for her to ignore. "Hey, sweetheart," Robert called out, leaning back in his chair. "We're waiting on that coffee refill. You sure you can handle it?" Emily didn't look back at him, though she could feel the weight of his words on her shoulders. Instead, she kept walking toward the kitchen, silently telling herself to let it go. She wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of reacting. "You're better than this," she reminded herself. But as she passed the corner booth where Keanu was sitting, she caught his eye. His gaze was calm, direct, but there was something there, something that made her feel seen. He didn't offer any words of pity, but his presence felt like an unspoken support. For a moment, she almost felt like she wasn't invisible. That was the moment Emily realized something. Maybe I don't have to handle this alone anymore. The diner was quiet for a moment as the new customers settled into their booths. Emily's mind was still on the encounter with Robert and his friends, and the way Keanu had looked at her, almost as if he could sense the weight she carried. But there was no time to dwell on it. She needed to focus on her work, just like always. Her shift had been long, and it seemed like the usual crowd of regulars wasn't helping her mood. One by one, the men at Robert's table ordered their meals, and Emily was quick to respond, though the tension in the air was palpable. As she poured coffee into their cups, she could feel their eyes on her, those condescending glances that never seemed to stop. Robert made a snide remark here and there, and the others followed suit with their own subtle insults. They were testing her, trying to see just how far they could push before she snapped. The worst part, she could feel herself getting pushed to the edge. It wasn't just about this group of men, it was everything. The lonely nights when Jake fell asleep in her arms, the bills piling up, the way the world seemed to treat her like she didn't matter. She had tried so hard to keep it all together, but lately it was getting harder to pretend that everything was okay. As she turned to leave their table, Robert called out again, this time with a louder, more pointed tone. "Hey, Emily," he said, using her name with a sickening familiarity. "You sure you're okay with this? I mean, you can't really expect to raise that kid of yours and be waitress forever, can you? Maybe you should look into some better opportunities, don't you think?" The other men at the table chuckled again, their laughter ringing through. The diner like nails on a chalkboard. Emily's face flushed, and her grip tightened around the tray she was holding. She was ready to turn away, to ignore them, to keep it together, until she saw it. Keanu had stood up from his booth. His movement was so smooth, so effortless, it almost felt like time had slowed down for a moment. Without saying a word, he casually approached Robert and his group. Emily froze in place, unable to look away. Her breath caught in her throat. Keanu's calm presence was like a stark contrast to the tension surrounding the men at the table. Robert didn't seem to notice at first. He was too caught up in his own arrogance, too focused on tearing Emily down. But then, as Keanu drew closer, Robert's tone faltered. Excuse me," Robert started, his voice suddenly unsure. "Can I help you?" Keanu didn't respond right away. He just looked at Robert with that quiet intensity that made everyone in the room go still. For a moment, Emily thought she might be imagining things. But then Keanu spoke, his voice steady, controlled. "You can start by showing some respect," he said, his words cutting through the air like a blade. "You don't know her story. You don't know anything about what she's going through. So if you want to make jokes, do it somewhere else." The men at the table went silent, all of them looking at Keanu in shock. They weren't used to someone challenging them like this, especially not a man who looked like he could make their whole world crumble with just one word. Robert, the leader of the group, seemed to shrink a little under Keanu's gaze. Emily was still standing at the counter, frozen in disbelief. Her heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't happening. Was Keanu really standing up for her? For the first time in a long time, she felt like someone saw her, not as a waitress, not as someone who was just trying to get by, but as a person. Keanu's voice broke through her thoughts again. "I don't know what makes you think it's okay to talk to someone like that," he said, his tone unwavering. "But I suggest you think about it next time before you open your mouth." The group of men exchanged uneasy glances. They were clearly caught off guard by the unexpected confrontation. Robert, still trying to save face, stood up slowly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He cleared his throat, his earlier confidence slipping away. All right," he muttered, clearly not used to being put in his place. "We'll get our check. No need to make a scene." Without another word, he and the others started gathering their things. The air was still thick with tension, but it felt different now. Emily felt a strange mix of relief and disbelief. Had Keanu really just done that? The men made their way to the counter to pay, avoiding eye contact with her as much as possible. As soon as they were gone, Emily could finally breathe again. She stood there for a moment, still processing what had just happened, when she felt a presence behind her. It was Keanu. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low and genuine. Emily turned slowly, her heart racing. She had no idea what to say. She wasn't used to someone caring, not like this. I think so," she said, her voice shaky. "I didn't expect that." Keanu nodded, his expression softening. "People like that. They don't get to make the rules. Don't let them define who you are." For a moment, Emily just stood there looking at him, unsure of how to respond. It wasn't just that Keanu had stood up for her. It was the way he had done it, calm, unbothered, like he had been there before, like he knew. "Thank you," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, a small, reassuring grin that made her heart feel lighter. "No problem. Just don't forget you're stronger than they think." As Keanu walked away, heading toward the door, Emily stood frozen for a few more seconds. The weight of everything, the bullying, the isolation, the years of fighting to stay afloat, felt a little less heavy. Maybe it was just a small moment. Maybe Keanu's intervention wouldn't change her life overnight. But for the first time in a long time, Emily felt like she wasn't invisible anymore. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur for Emily. The events of the last hour were so surreal that she barely had time to process them. She found herself replaying Keanu's words over and over in her head. "You're stronger than they think." It felt like a reminder she desperately needed to hear. But more than that, it made her realize something she had been avoiding for so long. She didn't have to put up with the abuse. She didn't have to stay stuck in a job that made her feel small. She didn't have to accept the disrespect from people like Robert and his friends anymore. But it wasn't just about the diner. It was about her life, her son, Jake, her dreams, her happiness. As the evening shift started, Emily tried her best to focus on her customers, but her mind kept drifting back to Keanu. She hadn't expected someone like him, someone so famous and successful, to step in and fight her battle. Sure, it wasn't the world's biggest intervention, but for Emily, it was the most meaningful thing to happen in a long time. It gave her a glimpse of something bigger, something more. She stood at the counter preparing to take another order when the bell above the door jingled again. Emily looked up and froze. This time, it wasn't just the usual crowd trickling. In it was Keanu, walking through the door like it was the most normal thing in the world. Her breath caught in her throat. Was he here to follow up on his words? Was he going to make another scene? She didn't know how to feel. She was still, processing the last time they'd spoken, and now he was back. Keanu spotted her immediately, and instead of the cool, distant look he had earlier, this time he gave her a warm smile. The kind of smile that said, "I see you. I get it." He walked up to the counter where Emily was standing, his eyes soft but serious. "Hey," he greeted her. "How's it going? Everything okay?" Emily blinked, surprised to hear the question. She had expected him to leave her alone after his intervention earlier, but here he was, checking in as if they were old friends. It made her heart race. She quickly wiped her hands on her apron, trying to gather herself. I'm fine," she said, though she knew it wasn't entirely true. "Just, another day." Keanu nodded thoughtfully. "I get it. I know life can be a lot sometimes. I've been there." He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. "Look, I know I'm not some kind of hero, but I just wanted to say, you deserve better than what those guys gave you." The sincerity in his voice sent a strange rush of emotions through Emily. She had been fighting so long to hold everything together, trying to survive in a world that often seemed indifferent to her struggles. And now, here was a man who not only noticed her, but cared enough to make her feel seen. She swallowed hard, feeling something inside her shift. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "It's just, I've been fighting for so long. I've been putting on this brave face for Jake, but some days it feels like it's all falling apart." Keanu leaned in, his eyes full of understanding. "I hear you, but you don't have to carry all of that by yourself. Not everyone is out to make you feel small. And sometimes it takes just one moment, one person standing up, to make you realize there's more out there for you." His words were like a lifeline tugging at her chest. Emily felt a lump form in her throat. Could she really believe that? Could she believe that her life could be different? That maybe she didn't have to accept the endless cycle of disrespect and hardship? She didn't know, but the possibility was there. And for the first time in a long time, that possibility felt real. Keanu glanced around the diner, then back at Emily. He said with a small grin, "I've been meaning to ask, what would it take for you to take a break from all this?" Emily stared at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Keanu continued, "maybe you should take a day off. Take some time to focus on yourself. I know you're a single mom, and that's a huge responsibility. But even superheroes need to recharge." The suggestion caught her off guard. She'd never considered taking time for herself. There was never enough time, and if she didn't work, she couldn't pay the bills. She felt the familiar weight of responsibility pressing on her chest again. "I don't know," she started, but Keanu cut her off. "Look, I'm not saying you have to quit your job or run away from your responsibilities," he said, his voice reassuring. "But maybe just one day to breathe. Think about it." Emily nodded slowly, feeling a mix of emotions. She wasn't sure if she was ready to make such a drastic change, but the idea of taking a break, of doing something just for herself, was something she hadn't considered in years. Maybe she could take a breath. Maybe it was time to take care of her own needs, too. Keanu smiled and gave her a pat on the shoulder before heading toward the door. "Take care of yourself, Emily," he said before leaving. As the door swung shut behind him, Emily stood there for a moment, absorbing the weight of everything that had just happened. It felt like a door had opened, just a crack, and on the other side was something different, something better. She didn't know where this journey would lead. She didn't know if taking a break from the diner was the answer. But she felt something, stirring inside her, an unfamiliar sense of possibility. Maybe it was time to start making choices for her for once, instead of just trying to survive. Maybe it was time for Emily to finally put herself first. The days following Keanu's unexpected visit were a whirlwind for Emily. She tried to go about her usual routine, but everything felt different. The diner was still the same, noisy, crowded, full of rushed orders and distracted conversations, but Emily was no longer just going through the motions. Keanu's words kept replaying in her mind like an echo, urging her to think beyond the confines of her daily grind. She hadn't taken a day off, The bills still needed to be paid, and Jake was counting on her. But something had shifted inside her. She couldn't ignore the tugging feeling that maybe, just maybe, she was worth more than the endless cycle she had locked herself into. But knowing that was one thing. Acting on it was another. The breaking point came one night during an unusually busy shift. The diner was packed, the chatter louder than usual, and Emily was struggling to keep up with the orders. Jake had been sick the past few days, and she hadn't been able to take a moment for herself. She hadn't seen the time slip away, the hours melting into one another as she dashed between tables, refilling drinks and taking orders, all while trying to stay focused on keeping up with the fast-paced demands of the diner. And then it happened. A man, a regular, came up to the counter to pay. He was dressed in his usual business attire, a well-dressed man in his 40s, looking sharp, but exuding an air of entitlement that always seemed to follow him. Emily had always kept it professional with him, though she could never shake the feeling that he didn't quite respect her. He often made snide comments under his breath about her job, her situation, her life. Tonight, he crossed a line. "You really should consider a new job, you know," he said, sliding a few bills onto the counter. His voice was thick with condescension. "Waitressing can't be that fulfilling, can it? And with a kid to take care of. I mean, come on, you're smarter than this, right?" Emily's breath caught in her throat, the familiar sting of humiliation rising up in her chest. It was always the same with men like him, always picking apart her choices, her struggles, as if they had any idea what it was like. "Excuse me?" she asked, her voice tight. She wasn't sure where the words were coming from, but something inside her had snapped. The man gave her a patronizing smile. "I just think you deserve better, that's all. You're wasting your potential, sweetie. You could have a real career if you wanted." The insult hung in the air like a poison, and for a moment Emily froze. Her mind raced, her body tense, with the urge to push back. But she was afraid of confrontation, afraid of how to even stand up for herself. She could feel the weight of the years of hurt, of rejection, of being invisible. But something deep within her began to stir. Something she had ignored for far too long, and then she felt a hand on her shoulder. She spun around, her heart pounding. To her surprise, it wasn't a customer. It wasn't even one of her co-workers. It was Keanu. He stood there, calm, with that quiet intensity that seemed to radiate from him like a protective shield. His eyes locked onto hers, his expression unreadable, yet full of understanding. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, his presence filling the space between her and the man who had just belittled her. "Is there a problem here?" Keanu asked, his voice low but filled with authority. The man blinked, clearly taken off guard by Keanu's sudden arrival. No problem at all," he stammered, suddenly looking unsure of himself. "I was just making a suggestion." Keanu didn't back down, his gaze never leaving the man. "You don't get to talk to her like that," he said firmly. "She's a person, not some punching bag for your insecurities." Emily stood frozen, not sure whether to be relieved or terrified. But Keanu's presence was a lifeline. She hadn't realized until this moment how much she needed someone to stand up for her, how much she had been internalizing all the disrespect over the years. The man looked around, realizing that the people in the diner had stopped talking, all eyes on him. He flushed, his bravado slipping away. "I didn't mean anything by it," he muttered, trying to backpedal. "I just thought, maybe she could do better for herself." Keanu stepped closer, his voice unwavering. "You don't get to decide what's best for her. She's doing the best she can, and that's more than enough." The man blinked rapidly, looking as if he wanted to argue, but the words didn't come. With a defeated sigh, he grabbed his change, avoiding Keanu's gaze, and hurried out of the diner. Emily stood there, staring at Keanu, her heart pounding. For a moment, the noise of the diner faded away, leaving just the two of them in a quiet, intense bubble. She didn't know what to say. She didn't even know how to process what had just happened. Keanu turned to her then, his expression softening. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. Emily swallowed, feeling tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She didn't know why, but she felt so seen. I don't know. I've never had anyone say something like that before, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Keanu gave her a small, reassuring smile. Well, I meant it. You're stronger than you think, Emily. You don't need to take that crap from anyone. She nodded slowly, the weight of his words settling deep within her. For the first time in so long, she felt like she didn't have to carry everything alone. Like maybe, just maybe, it was okay to let others help her carry the load. Thank you, she whispered, her voice trembling. Keanu gave her a nod. You deserve it. With that, he turned and walked out of the diner, leaving Emily standing there, her heart racing, her emotions a whirlwind of disbelief and relief. She had always thought she had to fight alone, that she had to keep everything bottled up inside. But now, after this moment, this unexpected intervention, Emily realized that maybe she didn't have to fight alone after all. The world outside was still a big, overwhelming place. But for the first time, Emily felt like she was strong enough to face it. The following days after the confrontation with the rude customer were like a breath of fresh air for Emily. She was still processing the events that had unfolded, but newfound sense of confidence began to take root in her heart. Keanu's words, his simple but impactful gesture, had shattered the wall of silence she had built around herself. For the first time in years, Emily felt like she wasn't invisible, like she mattered. As the days went by, Emily couldn't help but reflect on everything that had led her to this moment, her life, her choices, and how far she had come. But more importantly, she started thinking about where she wanted to go from here. That night, after her shift ended, Emily sat down at her kitchen table. Jake was already in bed, sound asleep, and the house was quiet. It was the first moment she had to herself in what felt like ages. She stared out the window, her thoughts racing. She thought about all the times she had kept her head down, the times she had endured people walking all over her, because she thought she had no other choice. She thought about how she had been so focused on just surviving that she had forgotten how to live. But now things were different. The truth was, Emily had been giving everything to everyone around her. Her job, her son, the world that constantly demanded more from her. And while all of that was important, she had neglected one crucial person, herself. For too long, Emily had believed that taking care of herself was selfish. But Keanu's words echoed in her mind again. You're stronger than you think. He was right. She was stronger than she had ever given herself credit for. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to start doing something for herself. A small, hopeful smile tugged at her lips as she reached for her phone. She pulled up a website she had bookmarked months ago, one she had never dared to visit because it felt like a distant dream. It was for a culinary school, a program that could help her finally pursue her passion for cooking, something she had put on hold for too long. Her fingers hovered over the screen, her heart racing as she hesitated. But then she thought about the last few days, the intervention at the diner, the kindness from a stranger who turned out to be more than just a stranger, the way she felt standing up for herself. All of it pushed her forward. With a deep breath, she tapped the button to apply for the program. It was a small step, but it was the first step toward a new beginning. She didn't know where this path would lead, but for the first time in a long time, she felt the thrill of possibility. For the first time in years, she felt like she was taking control of her life. The next morning, as she prepared to start her shift at the diner, Emily felt something inside her shift again. It wasn't just about her dreams anymore. It was about showing Jake what it meant to fight for what you believe in, to follow your heart, and to never settle for less than you deserve. As she walked into the diner, she noticed something strange. The usual customers were there, but there was a palpable difference in the air. There was a quiet respect between her and the other employees, an unspoken acknowledgement that things had changed. Even Robert, the manager, who had always kept a distance from her, gave her a brief nod as she walked by. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make her feel seen. As she worked, Emily found herself moving with a newfound sense of purpose. Every order she took, every drink she refilled felt different. She wasn't just doing it to survive anymore, she was doing it for something greater, something that started with believing in herself. That afternoon, during a lull in the shift, Emily spotted Keanu walking in once again. Her heart skipped a beat, and she found herself smiling before she could stop it. He waved at her from the entrance, and this time there was no surprise in her. She wasn't shocked to see him again. She felt like she was beginning to understand why he had come into her life when he did. He walked up to the counter, just like last time, and gave her a warm smile. "Hey, Emily," he said. "How's everything going?" Emily felt a strange sense of peace wash over her as she looked up at him. "It's going, well, actually, really well. I've been making some changes." Keanu's eyes softened as if he knew exactly what she meant. "That's good to hear. I knew you had it in you." She chuckled softly, feeling her cheeks flush. "I don't know about that, but I'm trying." Keanu's gaze was steady, sincere. "You're doing great. Sometimes it's the smallest steps that make the biggest difference." Emily nodded, the weight of his words settling into her chest like a comforting blanket. She realized now that everything she had been waiting for, the moment when things would change, had already happened. The change didn't come from external forces. It came from within her. As Keanu left the diner, he gave her one last nod as though to say, "I'm proud of you." Emily watched him go, her heart lighter than it had been in years. She wasn't sure where her path would take her, but she knew that with every step she took, she was getting closer to the person she had always been meant to be. And as the day came to a close, Emily looked forward to the future. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she knew she was no longer walking it alone. As the weeks passed, Emily's life continued to shift. The diner had become a place of purpose, not just a job, but a step in her journey toward something bigger. She continued her work with an energy she hadn't known she had. Each plate she served, each interaction with a customer, no longer felt like a weight. It was an opportunity to make a difference, to show her strength and to set an example for Jake. One evening, as Emily was taking a brief break at the counter, she found herself reflecting on how much her world had changed since Keanu had first walked through the diner's door. She could still remember the tense feeling of that first interaction, her body on edge, and how she'd let that feeling of inadequacy settle deep inside her. But now, she felt lighter, more confident. The steps she had taken, applying to culinary school, setting boundaries with people and allowing herself to dream, had begun to make a real difference. As Emily wiped down the counter, her phone buzzed. It was a notification from the culinary school she'd applied to. Her heart raced as she opened it, the screen loading slowly. She held her breath, her fingers trembling with anticipation. "Congratulations! You've been accepted to the culinary arts program." For a moment, everything stopped. The noise of the diner, the hum of conversations, and even the soft clink of silverware all faded into the background. It was as if the world had paused, giving her a chance to let the news sink in. Emily blinked, read the message again, and then let out a shaky breath. She had made it. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. Not now, not here. But her heart swelled with pride. She had taken the chance, taken that first step, and now she was closer than ever to living her dream. She sent a quick message to Jake. "Good news, buddy. Big change coming our way." A small part of her was nervous. There were so many unknowns ahead. How would she balance everything? Could she handle the pressure of school and work? Was this really what she wanted? Or was she just being impulsive? But then she thought about the people who had supported her, who had seen something in her that she hadn't seen in herself. Keanu's words echoed in her mind once again. "You're stronger than you think," and she was. She had proven that already. Later that evening, as she was locking up the diner, Robert, the manager, came over to her. "Hey, Emily, got a minute?" he asked, his tone lighter than usual. "Sure, what's up?" Emily asked, slightly taken aback by his change in demeanor. "I just wanted to say, you've been doing a great job lately. We've noticed the difference in your attitude, and it's been great to see. I've also heard some good things from the regulars." Robert paused, as if gathering his thoughts. "Look, I know we don't always see eye to eye, but I respect the effort you're putting in. Keep it up." Emily blinked, surprised by his words. She'd always felt that Robert was distant, never fully acknowledging her as anything more than just another employee. But here he was, offering his support. "Thanks, Robert," she said with a small smile. "That means a lot," he nodded. "Don't mention it. And good luck with your next steps. Whatever comes next, you've got this." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. For a moment, Emily stood there, letting the weight of everything she had accomplished and was about to accomplish sink in. She had earned this moment of acknowledgement, even if it came in the most unexpected of ways. As she walked out into the cool evening air, Emily took a deep breath. The world felt different now, more open, more full of possibilities. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she could handle whatever came her way. She thought about Jake, about how she had made this decision not just for herself but for him too. She wanted him to know that dreams weren't just for other people. They could be for anyone, no matter how difficult the path seemed. She wanted him to see that it was never too late to change, to fight for what you wanted. But as Emily made her way home, a thought crossed her mind. What if there was someone else who still needed to hear these words? What if, just like her, someone else was out there waiting for a chance, waiting for someone to stand up for them, just like Keanu had stood up for her? She pulled out her phone and began typing. "Hey everyone, I just wanted to share something with you all." The message flowed easily. She knew that there were people out there who needed to hear her story, who might be struggling with the same doubts and fears she once had. And if her story could inspire even one person, it would be worth it. She hit send. In that moment, Emily realized that her story was bigger than just her own. It was about showing up, taking risks, and never giving up on the dreams that called to her no matter how far out of reach they seemed. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for anyone who needed to hear that change was possible no matter where they started. She looked up at the stars, her heart full of hope. Emily's journey is one of transformation. From a place of struggle to a life of possibility, she took control of her destiny and now stands at the threshold of her dreams. Do you see yourself in Emily's story? Have you ever faced a challenge that seemed too big to overcome? Or maybe, like Emily, you've been afraid to take the first step toward your dreams. Share your thoughts with us below. If you've ever felt inspired by her journey, don't forget to like, comment, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Your journey could be just around the corner. What would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? Let us know in the comments below. Weeks passed after Emily received the acceptance letter from the culinary school, and life felt like it was in full swing. She juggled work, classes, and time with Jake. Despite the exhaustion that crept in, she felt more alive than ever. She had found a balance between her dreams and her responsibilities, and with each day, she felt more confident in her decisions. But what she hadn't expected was the ripple effect of her own story. As Emily continued to share her experiences, both the struggles and victories, more and more people began to reach out to her, sharing their own journeys. She had started small, with a post on her social media, telling her followers about her path to a new future. What she hadn't realized was how deeply it resonated with others. One afternoon, while Emily was sitting in the break room during a rare lull at work, she opened her phone to find a new message in her inbox. "Hi Emily, I just wanted to thank you for sharing your story. I'm a mom of 2, and I've been stuck in a job I hate for years just like you were. I always put my dreams on hold thinking there was no way to make them happen. After reading your post, I started taking steps to get back into the photography business I loved. I've been too scared for years, but your story inspired me. Thank you for showing me that I don't have to stay stuck. Best, Sarah." Emily blinked back tears. She had no idea that by simply being vulnerable, sharing her struggles and triumphs, she would be able to touch someone's life in such a profound way. She quickly typed a response to Sarah, offering words of encouragement, reminding her that taking those first steps, no matter how small, was the most important part of the journey. As she sent the message, Emily couldn't help but smile. This was bigger than her. Her story had become a beacon for others, showing them that change was possible and that they weren't alone. She thought back to Keanu's simple intervention, the way he had spoken to her as if he saw her potential before she could see it herself. Maybe, just maybe, that was the secret all along, seeing the potential in others before they saw it in themselves. Days later, as Emily finished her shift and began cleaning up for the night, she noticed a familiar face entering the diner. It was Keanu, of course. Emily felt a warm smile spread across her face as he waved at her from the door. "Keanu," she greeted him, walking over to his usual spot. "Back again." Keanu grinned. "I guess I just can't stay away from this place," he joked. "But seriously, I've been meaning to check in and see how you've been doing. How's everything?" Emily leaned against the counter, feeling a sense of gratitude wash over her. "Better than I could have imagined. I got accepted to culinary school, and things are starting to fall into place. It's been crazy, but in the best way." Keanu's eyes twinkled. "I knew you had it in you." Emily paused for a moment, then spoke softly. "You know, Keanu, I've been hearing from a lot of people lately. People who feel like I did, stuck in jobs they hate, not sure how to get out. And I've been able to help them, just by sharing my story." Keanu's expression softened and he nodded slowly. "That's the thing, Emily. When you change your life, it has this ripple effect. You might not see it right away, but you've inspired people to take action. Just like I tried to do for you." Emily smiled. "I never thought of it that way. It's crazy to think that a simple conversation, one small gesture, can lead to so much." "It's never just one small gesture," Keanu replied, his voice calm yet full of meaning. "It's the start of something bigger, and you've become a part of that change." As they chatted, the world outside seemed to grow dimmer, and Emily's mind buzzed with the realization that Keanu was right. This wasn't just about her anymore. Her journey had sparked something bigger than herself. And she was beginning to understand just how powerful the impact of one person's story could be. How has a story, whether it was your own or someone else's, changed the way you view your life? Have you ever found the courage to start something new after hearing someone's words or witnessing their journey? We'd love to hear from you. The days were getting warmer as spring began to settle in, and Emily found herself juggling even more than before. She had started her culinary classes, which were proving to be both exhilarating and overwhelming. The learning curve was steep, but Emily felt more alive in the kitchen than she ever had before. Cooking wasn't just about following a recipe. It was about expressing herself, telling a story with every ingredient, every technique, and every plate. Jake was growing more and more excited about the idea of his mom following her dreams, and Emily couldn't help but feel grateful for his unwavering support. He had always been her rock, her reminder of why she fought so hard. But as much as she was enjoying her classes, Emily couldn't ignore the growing anxiety that tugged at her heart every time she thought about the future. Would she be able to balance everything? Would she make enough to support herself and Jake while following this new path? And perhaps most daunting of all, what if, in the end, she wasn't good enough? What if her dreams were nothing more than an illusion? She couldn't deny that a part of her felt that old familiar voice creeping back in, the one that told her she wasn't cut out for something bigger. But Emily had learned to face those doubts head-on. She had learned to see them as challenges, not barriers. Still, there was something weighing heavily on her mind, something she couldn't shake: the diner. While it had been a constant in her life, a place that had given her a sense of stability, it no longer felt like the right fit. She loved her co-workers, and there was a part of her that would always cherish the moments spent there, serving meals and talking to regulars. But there was also the truth that she had grown beyond this chapter of her life. The diner no longer felt like home. It felt like a stepping stone to something greater. Emily had been offered more shifts at the diner, but every time she considered it, a sense of dread filled her chest. She couldn't keep up this pace. Something had to give. She knew she couldn't keep her dreams alive and continue living on the hamster wheel of the diner. She had already made a choice to take the next step, to follow her passion. But what would that mean for her job? Could she make it work financially, or was it time to leave the safety net of the diner for good? Later that week, Emily was working an evening shift when she saw Robert at the bar. She walked over to him, gathering her thoughts. "Hey, Robert," she started, her voice a little shaky. "Can I talk to you for a second?" He turned to her, looking up from his clipboard with a raised brow. "Sure, Emily. What's up?" "I've been thinking," she said slowly, feeling the weight of her decision settle on her shoulders. "I need to cut back on my hours here. I'm taking on more classes, and I just don't think I can keep doing both." Robert paused for a moment, considering her words. There was a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "I see. You're pursuing your passion, huh?" "Yeah," she said, nodding. "I've been working toward this for a while now, and I think it's time to fully commit. I just don't know if I can do it while still working here full-time." Robert leaned back, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "I get it. We've all got dreams, Emily, and I can see how hard you're working to make it happen. It's been a pleasure having you here, but I understand if you need to move on to something bigger." The weight in Emily's chest lifted slightly. She had feared this conversation, worried about how Robert would react, but his words reassured her. He wasn't just her manager. He was a person who recognized that life was about growth, even if that growth meant moving on from the diner. "You're not mad?" Emily asked, her voice almost a whisper. "No, I'm not mad. I just want what's best for you," Robert replied. "And hey, if you ever want to come back part-time or need something, you know where to find me." Emily smiled, grateful for his support. "Thank you, Robert. That means a lot to me." As she walked back to the kitchen, she felt a surge of relief. The decision wasn't easy, but it felt right. She was ready to step forward into a new chapter, even if that meant leaving behind something familiar. She had made it this far, and there was no turning back now. Have you ever had to make a tough decision between staying comfortable and taking a leap of faith towards something bigger? How did you handle it? And what did you learn from the experience? We want to hear your story in the comments below. The days following Emily's decision to leave the diner were filled with a whirlwind of emotions, relief mixed with anxiety, excitement followed by moments of doubt. It wasn't easy to step away from something that had been a constant in her life for so long. But Emily was certain of one thing. She was no longer the woman she had been when she first walked into the diner. She had changed, grown, and was ready to take the leap into something greater. It wasn't just the culinary classes that had transformed her life. It was the choices she had made, the courage to face her fears, and the willingness to believe in herself despite the challenges. The acceptance letter to culinary school had been the first big step. But it was the small everyday decisions, the conversations with Jake, the moments of vulnerability with herself, and the words of encouragement from people like Keanu and Robert that had truly shaped her path. One particular morning, as Emily stood in front of her stove at home, preparing breakfast for Jake, she found herself lost in thought. The aroma of sizzling eggs and fresh coffee filled the air, grounding her in the present moment. She was no longer waiting for something to happen. She was actively creating her future. Jake walked into the kitchen, his messy hair still sticking, up from sleep. "Good morning, Mom," he mumbled, giving her a sleepy smile. "Good morning, buddy," she replied, setting a plate of scrambled eggs in front of him. "How did you sleep?" "Good," Jake said with a grin. "Can't wait. For the weekend. Are we still going to the park?" Emily nodded, her heart swelling with love. Jake's enthusiasm was infectious, and it reminded her that she was doing this for him as much as for herself. She had always wanted to show him that anything was possible, that hard work and determination could lead to big things. But more than that, she wanted him to know that it was okay to dream. It was okay to fail. It was okay to rise again. "Absolutely. But first you need to eat breakfast so we can get moving," Emily teased, ruffling his hair. Jake chuckled, and for a moment, Emily allowed herself to feel the weight of everything she had accomplished. She wasn't just a single mom working in a diner anymore. She was a woman who had fought for her dreams and was creating a life she was proud of, one where her son could see the importance of chasing his own dreams. Later that afternoon, Emily received a call she had been waiting for. It was from the manager at a local restaurant she had interviewed with weeks ago. She had applied for a line cook position to gain some hands-on experience before she finished her culinary program. She had been nervous about the interview, unsure if her skills were up to par, but she had gone in with the determination to make a lasting impression. "Hi, Emily," the voice on the other end said. I'm calling to offer you the position. We were really impressed with your passion and experience, and we think you'll be a great addition to the team." Emily's breath caught in her throat. It was the moment she had been waiting for. The confirmation that she was moving in the right direction. "Thank you," Emily replied, her voice filled with emotion. "I won't let you down." After hanging up, she leaned back against the counter, a wide smile spreading across her face. This was it. This was the first step toward turning her dreams into reality. She had done it. As she looked out the window, at the city stretching out before her, she reflected on how far she had come. From the woman who had felt stuck, trapped by her circumstances, to the woman standing on the brink of a new beginning. It hadn't been easy. There had been days of doubt, days of struggle, and days when she wanted to give up. But those days only made her stronger, more determined to keep going. And then, as if on cue, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Keanu. "I heard the good news. I'm proud of you. Keep doing what you're doing. You've got this." Emily smiled, feeling a sense of gratitude wash over her. Keanu's words had always come at the right moment, like a reminder that she was on the right path. He had been there when she needed someone to believe in her, and now she believed in herself. Later that evening, after Jake had gone to bed, Emily sat down at her kitchen table, a journal in front of her. It had become a ritual for her to reflect on her day, to write down the things she was grateful for and the lessons she had learned. Tonight, she wrote, "I'm not where I thought I would be, but I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." She closed the journal with a sigh, content and at peace. Her life was far from perfect, but it was hers, filled with possibility, growth, and hope for the future. And for the first time, Emily understood that the true journey wasn't just about reaching a destination, it was about embracing the process, trusting in her ability to navigate the bumps along the way, and believing that every step, no matter how difficult, was leading her exactly where she was meant to go. Emily's journey is one of transformation, growth, and most importantly, self-belief. She's gone from struggling to survive to embracing her dreams, and in doing so, she's created a new future for herself and her son. Do you have a story of transformation? What challenges have you faced, and how did you overcome them? What's one step you're taking today to move closer to your own dreams? Share your thoughts below and inspire others to take their own first step toward change. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to share the story with someone who might need a little encouragement today. Remember, no dream is too big, and every step counts. As Emily closes this chapter of her life, she knows that the journey is far from over. The lessons she's learned will stay with her, shaping the woman she continues to become. But one thing is for sure. Emily is no longer waiting for life to happen to her. She is making it happen, and in that she finds her greatest strength.